Alright, YouTubers. This is Byron Campbell, also known as Kitten Hoarder on Board Game Geek, and today I'm going to be doing a very special No Cats Allowed playthrough video. And the reason that this is going to be No Cats Allowed is because the game that I'm going to be playing is Mansions of Madness, brought to you by Fantasy Flight Games. And Mansions of Madness, as you can probably tell, is a board game in the Arkham Horror universe. But it's a very different game than Arkham Horror. If you are not familiar with Mansions of Madness, which came out, I believe, in 2012, maybe 2011, it is what I would call a very risky game design. And that's Jimmy. He is lodging a protest against this No Cats Allowed video. I'm going to let him in right now, actually. Okay, I just had a cat hurricane blow through the room, and there's cat hair everywhere now. But I am alone once more, and I can continue my explanation of Mansions of Madness. So, Mansions of Madness is set in the Lovecraftian horror world of Arkham Horror and the newer Eldritch Horror and Elder Signs. And Mansions of Madness, unlike Arkham Horror or Eldritch Horror or Elder Sign, is not a fully cooperative game. It is a semi-cooperative or team-based game. There are 1 through 4 investigator players who are working cooperatively as a team to try to solve the mystery of the day, depending on which scenario you play. And there is 1 keeper player. And the keeper player's job is to set up the game using this elaborate setup mechanism that I mentioned earlier and make certain key choices about not only where specific items are going to be located. They might be in the kitchen in one game, and they might be in the boathouse in the next game. But also which objective both the investigators and the keeper are going for to win the game. So, playing the same scenario, in one game you might be trying to, find the secret tome and then burn it in the bonfire before the otherworldly horror can be summoned and unleashed upon the world. And in another game of the same scenario, you might actually need to fight and defeat that otherworldly horror. Whereas the keeper player has, maybe in one game he's trying to make all of the investigators go insane by subjecting them to horrors. And in the other game, he's just trying to kill them all, or he's trying to have one investigator go insane and then commit suicide, or he's trying to just win a battle of basically let the clock tick down, keep his monster alive until the clock ticks down. So there's a lot of variability in these stories, but I got really sidetracked. What I was trying to say is that that's the basics of the game. Now, I mentioned before that I think that this is a really risky game design, and the reason is these fixed elements of the setup that require such a time commitment, you should probably put aside 30 minutes for setting up the game every time you play, even if you're an experienced player. These fixed elements of the setup, and also the fact that the keeper is playing against the investigators, instead of, everybody working cooperatively as a team, have really divided a lot of people. Some people get really upset about the long setup. They don't feel that it's worth it, that it pays off in the end. And also, I'm just gonna, admit that in terms of looking at this as a game of one keeper versus a team of investigators, it is not the most well-balanced experience. Most scenarios, the keeper can play dirty and exploit certain actions in a not very fun way for either team and win just by brute force. Some scenarios are more heavily weighted toward the investigators, where if they take certain actions that are not very fun and exciting, then they will always win. So you shouldn't view this as a game of, one player versus a team of other players and trying to win at all costs. Nobody will have fun if you do that, and nobody will want to play the game anymore. However, if you treat the keeper as sort of like a game master in a role-playing game, and this is of the Arkham Horror line of games that are inspired by the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, this is probably the closest experience to the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. If you treat it as a hybrid of a role-playing game and a board game, and if the keeper player focuses more on giving the investigators a solid and interesting but fair challenge, with the, option that the keeper may win, but not, but if he tries to give them a good story experience, and he puts that as his priority instead of trying to win, this is an amazing game design. And I can say the same thing about the lengthy setup. Some people hate it, and some people, rightfully point out that there's not a whole lot of variability compared to something like Arkham Horror, where every encounter you get is random. There's only so many options you have when setting up the game in terms of shaking things up if you're playing the same scenario. But I think it really pays off because unlike those other games, the linearness of this really creates a cohesive story where not only does everything sort of fit together as it's stated outright, there is a lot of stuff that goes unsaid, that it's up to the keeper player, to read things ahead of time and sort of learn the backstory of the scenario and bring out those unstated elements of the story to make sure that the investigators experience the full depth, of thought that's gone into it. Every time I've played this game, I've come away from it with a really intense memory of the mansion and of the events that took place there. And even though, a room in darkness is just a standard room tile with a tiny little token placed on it that states that it's in darkness, it feels palpable in my memory of the game. So that is something that really kudos need to be given to the game designer Corey Konieczka from Fantasy Flight Games for creating this experience that's really one of a kind, as far as I'm concerned, in the board game world. So, that's Mansions of Madness. Now, I'm going to be taking you through not just a standard playthrough of Mansions of Madness. I'm going to be taking you through a variant that I designed that turns Mansions of Madness from this game with a keeper player and a team of investigators into a fully cooperative game. And as a fully cooperative game, you can play it solitaire, which I'm going to do, or you can play as a team. And this is called the Threat Deck variant. And it is a fairly complex variant, which is why I want to do a playthrough video of it. It changes the setup. It changes completely the way that the keeper plays. It basically, instead of trying to create an AI to govern the keeper playing exactly by the rules of the game, I took inspiration from the scenario, from the actions available to the keeper in the regular scenario, and I created a deck of threat cards. And the threat cards are sort of like the Locust AI cards in Gears of War, something like that. It's a very small deck of cards, generally like 6 to 8 cards in a scenario, and when you flip it over, it tells you what happens on that turn, basically what the keeper does. And it's not always going to be things that the keeper would technically be able to do in a game of Mansions of Madness if you were playing, the rules as written. But it gives you the same flavor, and it gives you the same story, and it gives you a consistent challenge for playing as a cooperative game. So, I'm going to turn this off now, and I'm going to sort of set it up, and I will get back to you. Alright, we're back. So, what I've done is I've got the game most of the way set up. I'm going to pull back here so you can see the layout of the mansion. Hey, Jimmy. So, we've got the mansion set up. If you've played Mansions of Madness before, you'll probably recognize this is the setup for the first story, which is the Fall of House Lynch. So that's the story we're going to be playing. And the first thing you need to realize about this threat deck variant is that it is a work in progress. The variant rules, the basic rules of the variant, are pretty much complete. I've play-tested it enough to be pretty confident in how it plays, but the scenarios themselves using this variant, basically you have to create a threat deck specific to the scenario for each scenario. So the scenarios themselves are still subject to revision, and I'm in fact going to be testing a few potential revisions in this playthrough. So if you have tried my threat deck variant before, and you printed it out and played with it, you might notice that some of the ways that I'm resolving things are not quite exactly the same as the version that I had previously posted to Board Game Geek. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is because each threat deck has to be specially tailored for the scenario and then play tested to make sure that it is winnable but still challenging, I'm doing this on a scenario-by-scenario basis. So far I've only have published scenarios 1 and 2 from the base game, Fall of House Lynch and the Inner Sanctum. I've done some work on scenario 3, I think it is, Blood Ties, and scenario 5, The Green-Eyed Boy, which was a nice little challenge for myself. And this month I'm going to be working on some more of them, after refamiliarizing myself with the variant using this playthrough. So, stay tuned for that, definitely. If you have a specific scenario you want me to try to focus on, let me know. I actually just ordered the Laboratory, which is the newest scenario. It's been out for a while, but it is the newest, from Amazon, and so that should be coming in the next couple of days. I'm really excited to get into that one. Okay. So, without further ado, I'm going to walk you through the aspects of the game setup that are different. So, we've got the mansion set up exactly as you would in a standard game. There might be a few scenarios where you set up the mansion slightly differently in terms of placing doors and whatnot, but mostly you're going to be doing it exactly as you would, following the rules in the Investigator Guide. We've got over here, we've made the Mythos deck exactly as we would in a standard game. So we have the Mythos cards for darkness, that's the bat symbol. We have the door Mythos cards, and we have the, I can find one in here, the upstairs Mythos cards. So that's exactly as you would when normally setting up this scenario. I have the spell cards set aside over here. I have all of my backup investigators, because investigators
can die in this game, and you need to bring in a new one. That actually happens quite frequently in this variant. I have the tokens that you would normally need set aside over here. Cards for the backup investigators, and here I have the first change, which is the trauma deck. And in the standard game of Mansions of Madness, you just have all of the trauma cards put together in a single deck. But when setting up the threat deck variant, you have to separate them into regular and severe traumas of each type. So there's a regular and severe injury and regular and severe madness cards. From left to right, that's what they are.
Regular injury, regular madness, severe madness. So, how do you do that? Well, I'm going to put this down for a second and get the cards out. So, regular injury cards are the ones without any printed cost on them. Not cost, but requirement of a specific level of injury. So it might say you can only play this if the investigator has 5 or fewer health remaining. If it doesn't have any requirement like that, that's called a regular injury. And those are injuries that the investigators will take if they have taken at least 1 damage, because you can't take an injury card unless you have damage, but have 5 or more, or more than 5, I think it is, health remaining. And this is outlined in the general practices document that you should download and read before you start playing with any of the specific scenarios for this threat deck variant. The severe injury are any injury cards with a printed cost. These are usually going to be 8 or 4. And those are cards that you take if your investigator has 5 or fewer health remaining, and you are asked to take an injury. You don't take the injuries and madness cards immediately when you take a hit, but the threat cards for the specific scenario might instruct you to take them. And then the regular madness cards are anything with a printed cost of 4 or higher, or a printed sanity requirement of 4 or higher. So some of them don't have a sanity requirement at all. Actually, I think all madness cards... No, here's one that doesn't have a sanity requirement at all. Some of them might have sanity requirement of 4. Those are all standard madness. The severe madness ones are the ones you really need to look out for. Those have a printed sanity requirement of 3 or fewer. Those are mostly going to be the 0 sanity ones, and then there's the 2 sanity one. And those are the ones you really got to watch out for, because as soon as you drop to 0 sanity, you are considered insane, and you're going to have to draw one of these, and it might be a really bad one that causes you to attack your fellow investigators or even kill yourself. If you've played Mansions of Madness, you're familiar with that. Okay, so moving on, I have set up the combat cards for each monster type, although we probably won't be seeing beast-type monsters in this scenario. I have gotten out the types of creatures that you are most likely to see in this scenario, if I'm remembering correctly. Unless a specific combat card asks you to bring out a specific type of monster. These are probably the only ones we're going to be seeing, and we hopefully won't be seeing that Shoggoth, but it's possible. I've got out all of the story tiles, story choice tiles, and that's because you use those to keep track of which story choices were put in play, which you will only find out as you're playing the game. So depending on how the board gets set up, you might have story choice 2A or 2B, and you take this, when you find out whether you have 2A or 2B, you take the appropriate one and you put it face up in front of you, so you will remember in case another card references it, like an event card. So this is the standard event deck. We don't need any of the keeper action cards. Those aren't used. They're replaced in this variant with the threat deck, which I will get to later. And finally, we have our investigators all set up. We will be playing with Dexter Drake, who has his Sword Cane and his Disappearing Act ability. We will be playing with Monterey Jack, who has his Obsessed Explorer and a legendary map and Thirsty for Discovery. And finally, we will be playing with Kate Winthrop, because specifically I wanted to show you how you use her Test Theories ability in this variant. Alright, so that is everything, but there's still another step we need to do to set up, which is seeding the mansion. So I'm going to show you how that is done in this variant. Alright, so the first thing that you do when setting up a game of Mansions and Madness using the Threat Deck variant is you have to get out the... It's up here. You get out the scenario sheet for the specific scenario that you're playing. And that is going to give you instructions for setting up the game, and it's also going to be something that you reference when you're playing. So, just follow the setup instructions exactly as they're written here, and you should be able to play the game without any trouble. So first it says everybody gets their investigators, set up the mansion, claim the cards listed in the Keeper Guide, swap out the Keeper action cards with threat cards, and then we're going to use these instructions to seed the mansion instead of how it is stated in the Keeper Guide. So, first thing we have to do is get all of the exploration cards that are listed for this scenario. So, I've gotten clues 1, 2, and 3, and in this variant, what's printed on the card does not matter. You do not ever actually reference the clue card that you've physically drawn. You figure out which story choice marker you have to claim, and then reference the appropriate paragraph in the scenario sheet. So I just always pick A, so I don't get confused for all of them. So we got clues 1, 2, and 3. We've got an axe, an elder sign, fire extinguisher, lantern, magic phrase, nameless cults, sedative, shotgun, the silver key, startling evidence, and this is another thing that I'm testing a revision. In the original variant, you replace startling evidence with another card, but I figured out a way to keep startling evidence and keep its original use, so I'm testing that in this game. Whiskey. And then we have the lock cards Dark Room, Jammed Door, Locked Door, Magical Lock, Padlocked Door, Sealed Door. And then we have the obstacle cards, Power Failure, Puzzle Box, and Suitcase. And I just like to grab all of the Nothing of Interest cards, because you don't need to grab a specific amount of Nothing of Interest cards. The setup instructions on the scenario sheet tell you when to mix in Nothing of Interest cards with your exploration cards and how many you'll need at that point, and then any leftover just get removed from the game. So I just like to grab them all at the beginning instead of worrying about grabbing a certain amount. So we're setting aside, we're going to follow these steps exactly. Number 1, set aside all Nothing of Interest cards in their own face-up pile. So I'm going to do that. In a separate face-up pile, set aside Fire Extinguisher, Startling Evidence, Silver Key, Magic Phrase, and clue cards 1, 2, and 3. So this is a separate face-up pile. And then we separate out the lock. We're going to shuffle all of the obstacle cards into a face-down pile. So I'm taking all the obstacle cards and shuffling them together. And we've got our first face-down pile. Then separate out the lock cards. Shuffle the remaining exploration cards into a face-down pile. So aside from the ones we've set aside, face up, we're putting the rest of them into a face-down random pile. We don't know the order of these cards. Okay, next we're going to seed one Nothing of Interest and the Sealed Door lock card, which we've set aside the lock cards already. So we're getting the Sealed Door and Nothing of Interest, and we're putting those in the ceremony room. And just as in the regular game of Mansions of Madness, when I list cards to seed, first I'm listing the bottom card, then the top card. So you just put them face down one at a time. Nothing of Interest, Sealed Door. In the ceremony room. So that is this room here. Okay. Shuffle together Magical Lock and Jammed Door. So we're going to find Magical Lock and Jammed Door. That's those two. And we're going to shuffle them together. And we're just going to shuffle while distracting ourselves, because we're only shuffling 2 cards, and it's pretty easy if you're paying attention to figure out which card is going to end up on top. So we're going to distract ourselves by talking about something else as I shuffle, 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 and then seed. I've got these 2 shuffled. I don't know which ones they are. I'm going to seed them randomly in the basement landing and the garden. So the basement landing and in the garden. So that's one of those ended up in that room there, and one of them ended up in this room here. And the garden is all one room. Okay. Next, we're going to shuffle together the locked door and dark room. So that's these 2 here. Shuffle those. Well, again, distracting ourselves by talking about some sort of an interesting story of something that happened to us, perhaps on the way to setting up this game. Actually, nothing interesting happened to me, although I did get up really early today. So I might be slightly more out of it than usual, although I'm usually pretty out of it when doing these playthroughs. I'm not very good at speaking extemporaneously. I tend to jumble my words and forget important words. But I've shuffled these cards, and that's what's important. Alright, and we're going to seed them randomly in the guest bedroom and master bedroom. So one of these is in the guest bedroom, and one of these is in the master bedroom. We don't know which is which. And we're going to bury a random obstacle card in the guest bedroom. So we take these obstacle cards that we've previously shuffled together. I'm going to give them another quick shuffle. Don't know which one they are, and we're going to bury one of them underneath the lock card that is in the guest bedroom. And when I say bury in this variant, it just means you seed it underneath any cards that are already in this room. So we buried it under the lock card, we did that. In the guest bedroom. Okay. Finally, seed a random exploration card and padlocked door in the storage closet. So we don't know what these exploration cards are. We've shuffled them previously. I'm just going to give them another quick shuffle. We take a random one, and these don't have any Nothing of Interest cards in them yet. Just a random exploration card and padlocked door. And we're going to put that in the storage closet, which is this tiny room off of the guest bedroom there. Okay, so we're done with that. That was step 3. Now we're going to randomly determine whether clue 3 will appear in the kitchen or the operating room. So, how do we do that? Well, you could just flip a coin, roll a die, whatever you want to do. I'm going to roll the die. Oh, did I forget to take... I forgot to get out the die to use in this game. So what I'm going to do instead, I'll get that out and in between videos, I'm going to flip this. If it comes grass side up, we're going to do A. The floorboard side up, we're going to do B. So we're going to flip. Alright, option B. So that is the operating room. Operating room. What is going in the operating room? Okay, clue 3 is going in the operating room. So we're taking clue 3, the silver key, which is in this face-up pile of cards. Just find the silver key. So clue 3, silver key. Remember, you're doing from bottom to top. And that's it. Clue 3 and silver key in the operating room. So the operating room is this room here off of the laboratory. Okay. Now the other room that was not chosen gets a fire extinguisher in it. So we've set aside the fire extinguisher previously in these cards. We're going to get that, and that was the kitchen. Gets the fire extinguisher. Like so. And then we will seed a random obstacle card. We don't know which one it is, but a random obstacle card is going into the operating room, and that's going on top of the other cards because I said seed and not bury. Alright, then depending on which one we ended up with, we are going to claim a story choice marker. So, usually you only have story choice markers 1 through 3, but because we have an extra step of randomness, we're doing 4. If it is in the operating room, we are claiming 4B. So there it is. So, we're just going to keep that like that so that we will remember when we need to read something out loud that we have 4B. Okay, so that is step 4. Step 5, seed a random exploration card, don't know what it is, and the final random obstacle in the freezer. And the freezer is this other room off of the laboratory. So it could be a really good card, it could be kind of crappy, we don't know. Alright, we have nothing of interest cards. We're going to take 5 of them now and put them in the remaining face down exploration cards and shuffle them up really well. And the reason you do that in this step is because we wanted to make sure that all of the cards that get seeded in this initial setup that are under lock cards and obstacle cards, we want to make sure that they're an actual useful exploration card and not a nothing of interest. So when you explore past an obstacle or into a locked room, you're always going to get something nice. Alright, so we're shuffling the 5 nothing of interest cards into the remaining face-down exploration cards. Then we're going to place a random exploration card in each room that does not yet have any cards in it. And we're going to be left with 1 random exploration card remaining, plus some of the cards we set aside that are face up. So we're going to keep these set aside over here, and we will reference those throughout the game, and then we get to get rid of all of these remaining nothing of interest cards. I'm just going to put them underneath here for now. It says return them to the box. Okay, so I'm going to set up the rest of the random exploration cards, and it can be easy to miss, so I'm going to record this one too. Some of these rooms are a little small. So, there's 1, 2, got 1 in the hallway here, and 1 in the hallway here, 1 in the laboratory, 1 in the entryway leading to the garden, 1 in the foyer, 1 in kitchen storage, that got flipped over somehow. And a final one in the dining room. And then we have one face-down exploration card remaining. We don't know what it is. It could be nothing of interest, or it could be something good. Okay, and that is setup. You'll notice we still have these cards remaining. That's because in the threat deck variant, there's an extra step whenever you reveal a lock or an obstacle. And you reveal a lock or an obstacle in one of two ways. Either the scenario sheet will tell you to reveal it at a specific point, such as when you discover a clue. It might say reveal the locks in the kitchen and the hallway, let's say. Or, in the standard rules, when you try to move into a locked room, you reveal the lock. And when you try to explore a room that has an obstacle in it, you will reveal the obstacle. And then immediately, before you complete your step, your turn, or your action, you immediately check the scenario sheet and and in the scenario sheet, it'll tell you what to do when you reveal that lock or obstacle. Bury a specific card in that room. Alright. So that is the complete setup for this variant. And then, as we play, we're going to be revealing lock cards, revealing obstacle cards, and we're going to be referencing the scenario sheet to see if we bury a card underneath it, and whenever we reveal a clue card, we're going to be referencing the scenario sheet. And it's going to tell us which flavor text to read, and if we have any other specific instructions, depending on which story choice marker got revealed. And we claim the story choice markers as usually as part of revealing these lock and obstacle cards. So we don't know where all of the clues are during the setup, just like if you had a keeper player setting it up. We have a good idea of where the lock cards have a 50-50 chance of being, but we don't know for sure. So that is setup, and then we're going to go straight into gameplay. So, we begin. Now, the investigator turns in the threat deck variant are exactly like in the regular game of Mansions of Madness. However, instead of the keeper turn, we are going to be turning over one of these threat cards. And also monsters will move and possibly attack. And, of course, we're going to be progressing time on these event cards. If you've never played Mansions of Madness before, this is a timed game. You only have a certain number of turns to complete it, although some scenarios play with that a bit. So, before we begin, though, we need to read the story so far, because this is a story-driven game. So, while we have a nice zoomed-in look at the investigators milling around in this wonderfully depicted foyer, the art style in this game is just incredible. I'm going to read to you the story so far. The office is thick with cigarette smoke. Filing cabinets line the walls, and a pile of magazines sticks out from under the leg of a cheap wooden desk. Behind the desk sits a pudgy, bald man full of nervous energy. "It's about time you got here," he says while tapping his fingers on the desk. "Time is money, and we're losing it by the truckload. I need your help finding our missing business partner." He tosses you a dirty manila folder. "Our missing man is named Walter Lynch. He's always been the brains of this operation, and without him this business venture is a bust. He hasn't been answering letters, and all of our other investigations have been..." He pauses, choosing his next word carefully. "Unsuccessful." He glances at the folder. "You have everything we know. Bring him back to us. More than you know is at stake." Later in your car, you carefully open the soiled folder. You find a crude map with directions to a mansion just outside of Arkham, Massachusetts. The drawing is primitive, as if sketched by a child. Behind the map lies a torn journal entry. June 8th, 1918. It has been nearly a year since the illness came for my son. The doctors were mystified as it slowly consumed his flesh. I am a man of action, and could not sit around and wait for my heir to deteriorate. 9 months I spent traveling the globe searching for a cure. From the depths of the jungles to the wisdom of the Orient, I found nothing. I kept searching deeper and deeper into the lost places of the world and beyond. I witnessed many mysteries and horrors, but the cure still eluded me. Little did I know that it was already too late. Back home, my son passed from this world, with no father there to comfort him. I returned home to my wife Edith, intending to stay for good. We grieved. Life slowly returned to normal, and I returned to work. I started up new business ventures and grew my fortune, while my soul languished. The healing process was not easy, but I found that helping mend Edith's heart helped me ignore my own pain. A briefer entry lies in the back. January 21, 1919. How could this happen? Why could this happen? You try to protect yourself. You try to protect your family, but it doesn't matter. Oh, Edith, you're all I have. How could it happen to you? I must dig deeper. I will turn over stones that I dared not touch. I will find answers. Alright, so that explains why our 3 intrepid investigators are there. And in case you're not familiar with the Arkham Horror lore, we have Dexter Drake, who is a stage magician, but who has come in contact through his encounters with the mythos with real magic. We have Monterey Jack, who's basically an Indiana Jones type, explorer, sort of pulp action character, and we have the scientist Kate Winthrop. Alright, and then, once we are done setting up the board, we are going to read the prologue. And we're going to read a specific part of the prologue depending on where things ended up and which story choice marker we claimed during setup. So after all players have finished setup, read the following aloud. Light rain falls on your face as you exit your car in front of the estate. The house is huge, unkept, and shrouded in eerie silence as you approach. You rap on the door and there is no response. A moment later, the door creaks open of its own accord, and you enter the foyer of the enormous mansion. Although the house is ancient, it doesn't make a single groan. It feels like the house is holding its breath, waiting for something awful to happen. The silence is suddenly shattered by blood-curdling screaming echoing from the direction of the laboratory. The house shakes like there's an earthquake, and dusty paintings fall off the walls. So that is the only information that we as investigators have to go on, and we are to explore the mansion, try to solve the mystery of what happened to Walter Lynch. So, in Mansions of Madness, your investigators can take their turn in any order, and an investigator turn is basically 2 movements and 1 action. And the movement is just moving to an adjacent space. In this game, diagonal spaces are considered adjacent, so this is actually 1 long space, but if it weren't, you could move directly from here to up here, because it is diagonally adjacent. As long as the spaces are touching, you can move to them. And you get 2 of those per turn, plus an action. And an action can be running for an additional movement, it can be exploring to turn over an exploration card, or it can be attacking a monster if there's a monster in your room, or using an item that says action on it. So, for example, this is actually a weapon, but you can use the sword cane to attack a monster in your space. And there are other things that we might find that have other actions. And let's see, you can also move in and out of hiding spaces, and I believe it just costs a movement or an action to get into a hiding space. And you can where is it? You can, for an action, you can move a barrier in front of a door in your room. So you can move the barrier here, block the door, try and keep monsters out. And then, let's see, what other things can you do with actions? You can attempt to resolve puzzles that might be on lock or exploration cards. Or not exploration cards, barriers. Alright. And I'm a little rusty on the rules of this game, so I might make a few mistakes. Just bear with me, and I will try to correct them if I notice any. So, we get 3 investigator turns, and we're about to begin. Okay, so the 3 investigators can act in any order, and I'm going to choose Monterey Jack to act first, because he has this legendary map. And the legendary map says, once per turn, you may look at the top card in your room, and place it face down. So we're going to see if this exploration card in the foyer is worth using your action to explore. So, I'm going to use that once per turn ability and look at, oh, that's a good one. It's Nameless Cults, which is a tome that lets you get the Blood Pact spell, which is basically healing. Healing your health. Each investigator, let me move it over here, each investigator has a health and a sanity. If your health reaches 0, that investigator is killed. If your sanity reaches 0, you're not killed right away, but you are a liability to the team, most definitely. And then they also have these various stats that are pretty much only used when testing your stats like you would in an RPG. Okay, so he knows that the spells tend to test your lore stat. And looking at the characters, Dexter and Kate Winthrop have the highest lore. And of the 2, Dexter has the highest health. So he's most likely to stick around long enough. Actually, though, Kate Winthrop does not start with a weapon, and Dexter does. So Dexter's probably going to want to use his actions to attack and not heal. So he's going to leave this card here so that on her turn, Kate can explore and grab that tome. Alright, then we get our 2 movements. And we heard this noise coming from the laboratory, so we're going to go try and investigate that to start out with. So for his 2 movement, he's going to move up the stairs, through the foyer, and for his second movement, move through this door into the first space of the laboratory. Back to the other 2 investigators, we'll have Kate move next, and she's going to use her action to... Oh, you know what? I didn't use my action. I forgot that it didn't cost an action to check that card with Monterey Jack. So he's going to use his action to explore this room. And when you explore, you just flip over the card, and oh, unfortunately, there's nothing but dust and cobwebs in the laboratory. So where could that scream have come from? Maybe one of these other rooms that's accessible off of the laboratory? We'll find out. So Kate is going to start out by using her action. And I didn't mention this, but you can use your action and movement in any order. So you can move, act, move, or move, act. And she finds, as she thought she would, the Nameless Cults tome. So she just takes that. And now she can't use it right away because it costs an action to use it. But on her next turn, she can. Oh, and she also has a high intellect, which is good. Alright. And she, let's see, she is also going to go 1, 2, and end up in the room with Monterey Jack. Now, in this starting scenario, it is generally a good idea for the investigators to stick together, because in the original rules and in the threat deck, monsters are more likely to find investigators who are going off on their own. A classic horror movie trope. But I think that what I'm going to do is, in fact, split up, because Dexter is fairly well armed compared to the others, and I want to explore more of the house more quickly, so he's going to, in fact, go 1, 2, and he's going to move into the basement landing, and he's going to explore that room. And oh boy, he finds a shotgun, which is nice to have, but he already has a weapon, so he's going to be looking for an opportunity to give this shotgun to probably Monterey Jack, who has a high marksmanship stat. Alright, but for now, that is the end of the investigator's turn. So then we go to the keeper turn, which is in 3 steps. The first step is known as the threat step, and that is first, if anybody has a stun token on them, you remove the stun tokens. And then we are going to draw the top card of the threat deck and resolve it. So this is the sort of the heart and soul of this variant, is this threat deck. So the top card says, Tooth and Nail. And the flavor text is, the creatures have developed a strange preoccupation with my flesh. Now, most of these threat cards have an if-then statement. If this, then this result. Otherwise, do this. Alright, so it says, if there are any monster figures within 2 spaces of an investigator, there are none. So we go straight to otherwise. Heal a maniac figure, blah, blah, blah. If there are no maniacs in play, discard this threat card and draw a new one. Alright, so the first one was a bust. We'll see what the next one says. Savagery. Bloodthirsty glimmer came into the creature's eye. If there are any monster figures, otherwise, move each monster figure, blah, blah. If there are no monster figures in play, discard this threat card and draw a new one. Okay, this doesn't normally happen, but, you know, for the first turn, there's probably not going to be any monsters, so you might need to... This is basically just to ensure that there are the correct amount of cards in here that deal with monsters moving and attacking for them to remain a threat, while still keeping the deck small enough that you cycle through it pretty regularly, because otherwise, you know, you might get a certain threat card that gets played, and then you, what am I thinking? Yeah, otherwise you might play a certain threat card, and then you know you don't have to worry about it. If there were like 10 cards in this deck, you know you wouldn't have to worry about it for the next 10 turns. So this way, you're going to cycle through it at least a few times through the course of the game. Alright, what does this next one say? The mansion strikes. If the mansion holds its breath is in the discard pile, it is not. So, search the threat deck for the mansion holds its breath and discard it. Shuffle this card back into the threat deck. So basically this is a 1-2 punch. The mansion holds its breath is basically says, silence was not comforting. I couldn't help feeling that it spelled my doom. Nothing happens this turn except you feel a vague sense of unease. So the mansion holds its breath is basically a mechanism to represent in the game, using the rules as written, the keeper has a certain amount of threat tokens, and he gathers threat tokens every turn and then spends them on various effects. And the mansion holds its breath represents the keeper is hoarding these threat tokens, because if the mansion holds its breath is in the discard pile and you draw the mansion strikes, you draw multiple threat cards on the next turn. So he spends a couple of turns doing nothing, and then multiple things will happen at once. And I'm considering doing a revision of this where you also shuffle in a random card from the discard pile back in when you do that. I'm not sure about it. We'll see. Alright, so that was the threat step, and then if there were any monsters in play, we would have the monster step, where all monsters move 2 spaces toward the nearest investigator, and then if they are in the same space as an investigator, they will automatically attack. The exception to this is if a monster has a sample token, which are, there are various threat cards that can cause the monster to take a sample. The way that sample tokens work is that if a monster takes a sample from an investigator, let's say there's a monster in Dexter's space, he would take a sample, and then from then on he does not move toward the investigators. He moves toward this altar. And he moves 2 spaces as normal, so he would go like 1, 2, and then the next turn he would go 1, 2. And if at the start of the threat step there's a monster in the same room as an altar, he drops off the sample token there, and bad stuff happens. First of all, you put another time token on the event deck, so it's basically you lost an entire turn as a result of this, an entire round as a result of the monster putting the sample there. In addition, it might have an impact on the outcome of the scenario. For example, in this scenario, we want to do everything we can to stop any samples from accruing on the altar, because if any samples end up on the altar, we will be facing a Shoggoth as the boss of the scenario. If there's no samples on the altar, we will be facing another boss that I will not spoil for you. So that's how sample tokens work. Okay, so that was the first turn, and we're going to move straight on to round 2. Oh, one step that we missed. At the end of the keeper turn, you always have the event step where you put a clock token on the event. Now, then each investigator has a turn again, and so on. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is Dexter has this shotgun that he wants to get to one of the other investigators. So he's going to try and do that. You can only trade equipment during the keeper turn. You can do it at any time during the keeper turn using this variant. In the official rules, there's a specific time when you can do it, but in this variant, you can do it at any time in the keeper turn. Okay. But he will also like to explore what this lock card is. So he's going to move. Now, when you move into a room with a lock card, if it hasn't been revealed yet, you first reveal the lock card, and you probably won't be able to continue your movement. And so we will reveal the lock card, and it says jammed door. You grunt with effort as you try to force the door open. Test your strength. Pass, discard this card. Fail, the door is locked. Now, I'm going to attempt to resolve that lock card, but first, I'm going to examine the scenario sheet. And see what I need to do when I reveal the jammed door. And we look, it says, bury the last remaining face-down exploration card without looking at it in this room. So before I finish resolving the lock card, I'm going to take this face-down exploration card we set aside at the beginning of the game and bury it underneath the jammed door. Alright, now I'm going to test my strength as we immediately attempt to resolve this lock card. So, when you do a test, you examine your character and you look at his stats and you see that Dexter has a strength of 4, not that high. And then you're going to roll I believe it's an 8-sided die. It might be a D10, but I believe it's no, it is a D10, I think. You roll a 10-sided die that comes with the game, and you are trying to get, basically, match or roll lower than your stat. So the higher the stat, the higher your chance of success by matching it or rolling lower. So if we were testing his dexterity, we would have a greater than 50% chance of succeeding at the test, because you're trying to get a 6 or below on a D10. For the strength, we don't have a great chance, because we need to get a 4 or lower, but we're going to try it anyway. Alright, not a good roll. We rolled a 9, which was not equal to or lower than Dexter's strength of 4, so that was a failure. Now, I didn't mention this, if you're not familiar with the rules of Mansions of Madness, I could have spent a skill token. Every investigator starts with a specific number of skill tokens to add his luck to the roll, or to the stat before I roll it. So it would have been 4 plus 4, it would have needed to get an 8 or lower. Now that would have been rather higher chance, but as it happens, he still would have failed. So, if we fail this test, it says the door is locked. Now we can attempt to move into the room again for another movement step, but for this movement step we failed trying to enter the room. So, that costs one movement step. He didn't move because the door remains locked. And for his other movement step, he's going to move. Movement, you can always move through these doors, or if there is, for example, no door in between two tiles, you can move between them like that. But you can never move through these solid brown lines, those are walls. So for his other movement step, he's going to move back into the foyer, and finally he is going to use his action to do a sprint, and that's one additional movement. So that is Dexter's turn. Okay, so then we go back to Monterey, Jack, and Kate Winthrop. They're still investigating that noise we heard coming from the direction of the laboratory. Now, clearly it wasn't whatever was in the laboratory, because they found nothing when they searched the room. So it must be one of these other rooms adjacent to the laboratory. So we're going to investigate that, and I believe I will have Kate go first, because I want to use Monterey Jack's legendary map again, and I know that there's going to be a barrier here, so it wouldn't make much sense to use Monterey Jack's legendary map on the barrier. So, Kate, 1, 2, and then for her action she's going to explore. Now when you explore a room with a barrier, or an obstacle, barrier are these things. An obstacle card, when you explore a room with an obstacle card, you don't look at every card. You only look at the obstacle card. And this, remember, counts as revealing the obstacle card, so we have to immediately check. So it says, you find a sturdy suitcase sealed by a simple combination lock. We are going to have to solve lock puzzle 6A to see what else is in this room. And we're going to look at our scenario sheet and see if that is mentioned anywhere. Alright, so we're going to look at our scenario sheet to see if it is mentioned anywhere, but it isn't. So that means that we don't have to do anything additional aside from resolving this obstacle as normal. So that is our first instance of a puzzle. Now, puzzles are one of the really cool things in Mansions of Madness, and this is another one of the things that sort of divides players. Some people hate them, some people, like me, love them. I think they're fabulous. They really give you that sense of an old-school survival horror video game, which I love. And this entire game is really has the feel of an old-school survival horror video game, as you follow a sound that you hear to a room, you find a note and a key. The note leads you to another room where you use the key to unlock a door, which gives you a magical password that you use to unlock, a magical glowing force field in a different room. Very survival horror. And these puzzles also give you a good sense of that. So to set up a puzzle, you look at... gotta get the glare out of the way. You look at the puzzle as it's depicted there, and it'll tell you which number to use as the base. So this is lock puzzle 6A. So I'm going to set that up and then get back to you. Alright, here is lock puzzle 6A. We're about to finish setting it up. And if you've never played Mansions of Madness, this is a really cool design choice. So first, we're drawing... So this is the basis of the puzzle. This never changes. And it could be 6B, and there's different shapes depending on how difficult they want the puzzle to be, how many pieces they want there to be in the puzzle. For this one, it's a pretty simple lock on this suitcase, and we take 4 of these dials, basically, at random from this pile of completely random tokens, and we put them with the arrow side facing up in each of the empty spaces. Well, that was actually a pretty lucky break for us. All right. And all right, and it ends up like that. Now, Kate, and only Kate, there's a rule in the book that you can't help other players solving the puzzle, but you can always use a house rule to resolve this if you're one of those people who really hates puzzles. Kate's going to attempt to solve this puzzle. And how she does that is she has to either rotate or replace these dials so that the color and shape of the runes matches the ones adjacent to them. So for instance, for her first action, solving the puzzle, she could rotate the dial like that. Actually, that's not a good choice because this still isn't matching, but the green is matching there. I meant to show you what she is going to do as her first action is rotate this top dial clockwise one space, and then suddenly we have green, 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 so that top dial is all set. And that costs her one puzzle action. You have a number of puzzle actions each turn equal to your intellect. So, if we look over here, Kate's intellect is 6, so she gets 6 moves to try to solve this puzzle. And then she's going to examine these other things. Now, you can play with a timer. That's another variant. That this is actually suggested in the official rulebook as a possible variant to play these puzzles with a timer to get a little bit more pressure, but it's not necessary to be sure. Okay, so looking at these other ones, it's clear that none of these dials are going to work. No matter which way you twist them, they're just not going to fit and match all of the runes. So she's unfortunately going to have to use the remaining actions to try to get new ones. And how you do that is it costs 2 puzzle actions to replace one of these pieces. So we draw a new tile to replace it, and then you get to choose which piece you're going to replace with this tile. And that costs 2 actions, so she spent 3 of her 6. Alright, let's see. Okay, it could fit up here if we orient it like that, but you always have to put it into play with the arrow facing up. But if we orient it like that, it would fit there. Let's see, or we could put it down here and orient it like that. But let's replace this one for now. Alright, so this one gets set aside, and that's 3. So we're going to do 2 more to draw a new one. So this is 5 puzzle actions. Alright. Yeah, that'll work down there. 5. And for her final puzzle action, she's going to twist this dial to the left, and these top 2 are matching. This one just needs 1 twist, and this one will need to be replaced. But that's her 6 actions. Now she could spend a skill token to get 2 more actions, adding her luck to the amount of puzzle actions she has. But, your skill tokens are a limited resource, and she doesn't want to use them all up. Especially since she definitely wouldn't be able to solve the puzzle with just 2 more actions. So she's going to end her turn there, which means she does not get to explore past this suitcase. However, the puzzle, as it is, remains in play, and Monterey Jack is going to go in and finish solving it for her. So, Monterey Jack is the last investigator to take a turn. He's going to go 1, 2, and he's going to finish solving this suitcase puzzle for Kate. Having a little trouble there, Kate? So he has an intellect of 5, which should be plenty to finish this puzzle. We actually got really poor luck for this one. This puzzle is usually a lot easier. So, 1, and then this will have to be replaced. So that's 2, 3, and hopefully it's something that'll fit. Oh, yeah, that'll work. 2, 3, 4, and with that, everything lines up. You can imagine if you were playing a survival horror game, these runes would start to glow, and then you'd hear a click, and the suitcase swings open. Alright, so let's see what's underneath it. The next exploration card under the suitcase is a silver key. So, as the investigator who finished solving the puzzle, the silver key goes to Monterey Jack over here. But there's still one more exploration card. When you explore, unless you hit a barrier, you can pick up all of the cards in the room. So, let's see what's left here. And it is the first clue. Now remember, in the threat deck variant, you completely ignore the text on the clues, so we're going to check what it says to do in our scenario sheet. So, clue 3. It says, reveal the lock cards in the master bedroom and the guest bedroom. So, immediately we're going to reveal these. In the master bedroom is a dark room. No, that's the guest bedroom. Guest bedroom is a dark room. And the master bedroom is a locked door. Okay. If the locked door is in the master bedroom, which it was, claim story choice 3A. So, we're going to claim story choice marker 3A. Just happened to be the one that was on top. Otherwise, claim story choice marker 3B. Now, since we have revealed these lock cards, we have to, before we do anything else, we immediately have to resolve what it says. So, we revealed the dark room and the locked door. So, in the dark room, we bury the card, which... in the original rules, you replace startling evidence, but this time we're using startling evidence. So we're going to bury startling evidence in the dark room, which is the guest bedroom. And then we're going to, in the locked room, bury the magic phrase and clue 2. So we take the magic phrase card and clue 2, and remember, you always do it in order so that the card that's listed first is on the bottom. So magic phrase, clue 2, and locked door. Alright. We have revealed those cards and finished everything that we need to resolve when we reveal, and now we are going to read the text that matches the story choice marker that we claimed. We claimed 3A. So, I'm going to read this out loud. So, this is... The room is empty except for the burnt outline of a human on the table. Upon closer examination, you find a simple silver key hidden in the soot. A trail of blackened footprints leads up the foyer stairs and right down the hall. So, as the investigator, now we already know where the locked door is that goes with the key. But if you were playing this variant fully cooperatively with multiple players, I suggest that you have one pseudo-keeper player who does all of this stuff and still plays on a team with the other players, but he would be the only player who would know where the locked door is and what things are seated underneath it. Because instead of revealing, he would just peek at them. So, in that case, then the pseudo-keeper would be like I said, he's still playing on the team with the other investigators, but he would be the only one who knows that, and the other investigators would have to, as was originally intended in the game, interpret this clue to figure out where to go next. So, interpreting this clue, Monterey Jack, who just now, for some reason, noticed the trail of blackened footprints leading from the soot, the shape of a charred human outline on the operating table in here, he would follow the trail of footprints and notice that they lead through the door out of the foyer and right down the hall. So, putting two and two together, he might figure out that he needs to go into this hallway too. Alright, so, as we left off, we were about to do the second keeper turn of the game. But before I do that, I want to mention something. So, in the last turn, the investigators explored the operating room, and they found a suitcase, and when they opened up the suitcase, they discovered the charred outline of a body on the table. And that's because, in this variant, I've tried to introduce a little additional randomness to the setup, where possible. So, instead of having a specific obstacle card in this room, as you would when setting up the game, normally I had it be a random obstacle card. But seeing it in play this time, it struck me that it really is not very thematic, that they open up the suitcase and just then discover a large human-sized and shaped charred outline on the operating table. So I'm going to be adding that revision to the threat deck scenario sheet for this scenario as well, and that obstacle card from now on is going to be the power failure obstacle, as it is in the original version of the scenario. So, just in case you noticed that as well, that was a little bit odd thematically, that was not the fault of the designers of the game, that was me, and I will be addressing that in my next revision. Okay, so, now we have Keeper turn 2. Let's see what happens. Oh, first, at any time during the Keeper turn, the investigators who are in the same room can exchange, who might be in the same space, can exchange items. And we're actually going to do that. We're going to have Monterey Jack give the silver key that he just found to Kate Winthrop. Because he, with his legendary map, he's going to keep exploring this area and seeing if he can find any more useful equipment. So he's giving the key to Kate so that she can head out toward the master bedroom to find the next clue. Alright, so when that is done, we're going to draw the next threat card, and it is... Here's Johnny! The wall exploded in splinters. If there are no maniac figures in play, which there are not, spawn a maniac in the room containing the smallest group of investigators. Now, in the standard scenario, the standard rules for this scenario, the keeper has action cards that he can use to put enemies in play sometimes or do other effects. The one that spawns maniacs can only be used on an investigator who is in a room by themselves. And that is sort of a tutorial, I guess, for the investigator players that they probably try to work together as a team instead of splitting up and each doing their own thing. I didn't want to have that limitation in the threat deck variant because it being a fully cooperative game, you expect the keeper opponent to have a little bit more bite to it, especially because it has a lack of any real intelligence. So I changed it to spawn a maniac figure in the room containing the smallest group of investigators. So even if there are investigators in groups, the maniac will spawn, but he still spawns in the room containing the smallest group, which in this case is the lone investigator, Dexter Drake. So, here's Johnny! Whoosh! An axe-wielding maniac bursts through the walls. Okay, a couple of things happen here. As in the regular rules for Mansions of Madness, every time a monster enters your room, or you enter a room containing a monster, once per round, at least, you have to do what's called a horror check, which is you test your willpower stat, which for Dexter Drake is a 5, modified by the monster's, I don't know, is there a word for it? It's like it's horror modifier, basically. It's how intimidating the monster is. Okay, so we're going to test Dexter's willpower of 5 versus the monster's horror rating, which is the bottom number here. The top number is the monster's awareness, how easy it is to evade, basically. And the bottom number is how frightening this monster is. This guy's just a regular human, so he's not that scary, but he is carrying a giant axe. So that's going to be a -1 to Dexter's sanity, or Dexter's willpower. And if he loses, he's going to take a horror token, which basically reduces his sanity by 1. So he has to roll this d10 and get a 4 or better. Again, I'm not going to use a skill token because I want to save those for when they really matter. And he succeeded because he got a 4 or lower, so he was not too frightened by this maniac. So that is the threat step of the Keeper turn. Now we have the monster step. And the monster step, basically all monsters will move 2 spaces toward the closest investigator, unless they're carrying a sample, in which case they move toward the altar instead, which would be over here. And then, if they're in the same space as an investigator, they will attack. So let's pretend the monster was over here in the basement. He would go 1, 2, because Dexter is the nearest investigator, and then he'd attack. But since he's already in the space with Dexter, he doesn't move, he just attacks. So when you resolve an attack in Mansions of Madness, you draw a card from this giant pile. This is with the expansions, but still pretty sizable pile of combat cards. And you have to draw a card matching the type of monster it is. So this is a blue coloration under his awareness. That means he's a humanoid monster, so we will draw from the humanoid monster stack. And then you look at the card and you scroll down to where it says monster attack. Some of them say something else, like monster versus hiding or monster versus barrier, in which case you would continue drawing until you find one that says monster attack. And then you read what it says and do that. If you were the investigator attacking, you would do the same thing, but you only resolve, you look at the top half of the card and you only resolve the one matching what type of weapon the investigator is using versus this monster. So we're going to look down here at monster attack. And it says, and this is another place where if you have a pseudo-keeper player, it would be very useful for them to read this out loud and do a little bit of flourishing in the flavor here. Because the flavor is generally good, but it's general because you don't know if it's a maniac or a witch or a zombie or a cultist, you know, who's attacking. So it's very generic language. So if you have somebody who is into role-playing or is a good storyteller, you know, encourage that player to do add a little bit of a flourish to this. So instead of your enemy, I'm going to say, you know, the crazy-eyed man moves with alarming speed, anticipating your every move. Test your dexterity. So here we have Dexter has a dexterity of 6, which is really good. Makes sense, given his name. So we're going to roll and try and get a 6 or lower. Aha! Right on. So we have passed. Dexter proves too unpredictable to be struck, so completely dodged this monster attack. If he had failed, he would have taken some damage. So that ends the monster step, and then finally we have the event step where we put another time token on the event card. As soon as there are a number of time tokens equal to this number on the bottom of the card, we reveal the event. But there's still one more turn before that happens. Alright, so we are in a bad situation here. Because now, all of a sudden, there are monsters in play. The first couple of turns were pretty easy going because there were no monsters to deal with. But now, suddenly, we have to worry about the monsters. That makes things a lot more complicated. We still want to try and make it to the master bedroom and use the key to unlock that door. But before we can do that, we're going to have to pass through this room containing the maniac, and he's going to be chasing us around the entire mansion, trying to make us into mincemeat. Alright, so we're going to start with Dexter Drake as the first investigator to act, because he has 2 weapons that he could use against the maniac. I'm going to show you those. Alright, he has this shotgun that he picked up in the basement staircase, and he has this sword cane that he started out with. Now the sword cane is interesting because it's both a sharp and blunt melee weapon, so it could count as either, and it deals a damage of only 2 if it's successful. The shotgun is a ranged weapon, and it deals a damage of 4 if it's successful, and deal plus 2 damage when attacking a monster in your space. So the shotgun is amazingly powerful. The sword cane is good because Dexter has a very high dexterity, as I mentioned before, and when attacking with this weapon, all strength tests are considered dexterity tests. So he can use his dexterity, which is his higher stat, whenever he attacks with that. But I think given the insane amount of damage he could do against the maniac in his space, he's going to shoot with the shotgun. So he's going to probably have to test his marksmanship. But that's what these combat cards, that's where they come into play, because he might not actually have to test his marksmanship. He might have to test his strength, because he fumbles the gun and needs to hit the monster with the butt of his gun instead. Or, he might have to test his dexterity as he tries to catch the gun as it tumbles to the ground. Or he might have to test his intellect as he tries to predict where the monster is going to go. So you never know what you're going to have to test when you attack with these weapons. So he's going to attack with the shotgun, though. And that's his action for the turn. And it says, the top card just happened to be for a ranged weapon. Alright. As you raise your firearm, your nervous hands fumble the weapon. Just as I suspected might happen, I'm going to have to test my dexterity. So, we need a 6 or lower. There's a pretty good chance of doing that. I was going to use a skill token on this test, but we have a pretty good chance with a dexterity of 6 of passing. So, let's hope for the best. Oh boy. Now that did hit the maniac, but I'm going to count it. That's a 1, and 1 is automatically a success, no matter what your stat is. Just like 10 is automatically a failure, no matter what your stat is. So you always have a chance of succeeding or failing. Alright. So, Dexter fumbles the shotgun, but he manages to catch it. The moment passes, and he fires with confidence. He's going to deal his weapon damage -1. So sometimes it tells you how much damage to deal. Otherwise, you deal your weapon damage, which is what's printed on the card. And this is +2 because he's in the same space as the maniac. But -1 because he did fumble his gun a little bit. So that's going to be a total of 5. And here is where we get to look at the bottom part of the tile. Now normally, only the keeper gets to see these. But, because we don't have a keeper, we're going to look at it ourselves. And this will tell us his maximum health, and how much damage he does, and what his special attack is. Some of the combat cards say to do with the monster's special attack. In this case, I don't want to spoil the special attack for you, but he has a maximum health of 5. So in that one hit, the maniac is downed. So Dexter has successfully killed the maniac and made sure that he's not a threat for the other players. Then he is going to move, and he's going to try to meet up with Kate and hand her that shotgun, because her marksmanship is slightly higher than his. So he's going to go 1, 2, into the laboratory. So that was Dexter's turn. Pretty neat. Now, I'm going to give you a little spoiler for this scenario. You might be familiar with horror movies and the trope that, when there's a slasher in a horror movie and you think you've killed it, it's not actually dead. This is exactly what happens in this scenario. This maniac functions just like a slasher in a slasher movie, and he will keep coming after the characters continually throughout the scenario until they solve the mystery of where Walter Lynch could be and complete the mission. So, Dexter, you should have double tapped. Maniac is still lying there. Alright. Next we'll have Kate Winthrop. And she is going to have a very simple turn. She's going to go 1, 2, and move into the laboratory with Dexter so that they can trade. He can give her the shotgun. And for her action, she's going to use this Nameless Cults. So Nameless Cult says, as an action, you can test your intellect +1. If you pass, take 1 horror, discard this card, and gain a Blood Pact spell. So, Kate is going to read this Nameless Cult's tome and see if she can learn the Blood Pact spell from it. So she's going to test her intellect, which is 6, +1, so that's a 7 or lower. And that's a 1. Alright. So, we're discarding Nameless Cults, and we're gaining the Blood Pact spell, which just happened to be on the top of this pile of spell cards. Now, the spell cards are really interesting in this game, and I'll show you why. So when Kate gains the Blood Pact spell, she actually gains this entire deck of spells. This isn't technically how it works in the rules, but I find it a lot simpler to do it this way, and it has the exact same gameplay effect. You're supposed to just take 1 at a time, but I find it easier to just give them the entire deck. She has this whole deck of spells. They all look the same on the front, and they all have the same basic effect, heal 1 damage to an investigator in your room. But when you cast the spell, you test your lore and flip the card over. And depending on if you pass or fail, it could have many different effects depending on which card you have. And you'll never know which card it is. There's 5 different cards. You could have any number of unforeseen consequences to casting the spell. So, but Kate did have to gain a horror token. So, this has effectively reduced her sanity from its starting value of 11 down to 10. That means that she is eligible from now on to gain an insanity trauma from this thick pile of insanity that'll give her a little bit of a nervous twitch. Alright, final turn for the investigators is Monterey Jack. And instead of going off with the others, he is going to continue investigating. He's going to check out the entryway here. See what's going on out in the garden shed. And he's going to use his once per turn ability of the legendary map to see if this card is worth picking up. It's Whiskey, which gives you +1 to your willpower, and you can discard it, basically drink the bottle, to heal some horror. There's a nice little thematic flavor there. Alright, he's not going to waste his action. Well, we'll see. He's going to use his second movement to try to move out into the garden, but there's a lock card there. So we're going to reveal the lock card, and it's a magical lock. The door leading to this room, this garden, is sealed with a lock that will only open if you know the proper phrase. So, this door is sealed with some arcane magic, and we are going to have to consult our scenario sheet and see what happens when we reveal the magical lock. It says, well, I won't try and show that to you. It says bury clue 1 in the room. So this is our last card that we set aside at the beginning of the game. Clue 1. Now remember, it's not what it actually says. It will say something different depending on what our story choice markers we had to claim as part of the scenario sheet. But now we know that our ultimate goal, Clue 1 is always the ultimate goal of the scenario. Well, Clue 1 tells you what your ultimate goal is. We need to find Clue 1 most of the time in order to finish the scenario. We know that that's out in the garden, but we need to find the magical passphrase to open that door before we can enter the garden. Okay, so that ends our third investigator turn, and Dexter is going to go ahead and give the shotgun to Kate, since they are in the same space, during the beginning of the keeper turn, and then we're going to do the threat step. The mansion strikes. It was this moment that I was to pay for all my sins. If the mansion holds its breath is in the discard pile. Let's see. The mansion holds its breath is in the discard pile. So, place a threat token on the threat deck. Next keeper turn, discard the threat token and draw and resolve 2 threat cards. So basically, every time through this deck, the keeper spends 2 rounds just hoarding threat, and then you get a big explosion of stuff after you draw that mansion strikes card. So 2 things are going to happen next turn instead of just 1. That could be really bad for us if it's a really bad confluence of things. Then, monsters. No monsters except the not quite dead maniac here. So we can skip that step, and finally, the event. And as you can see, this is going to be the 3rd time token. Third time token. So we're going to remove all the time tokens and reveal and discard this card. So, the clock strikes 10. If clue 3 has not been found, each investigator takes 1 horror. Otherwise, resolve one of the following. Clue 3 has been found. That was the charred corpse on the operating table there. So this is another thing in the opening scenario to sort of train the players. Okay, you have to get on these clues. Those are the main reason you're here. You can't just go explore willy-nilly. So, a little punishment if you don't resolve it. And then, consulting our story choice marker that we claimed, we read 3A. A fiery figure bolts down the hallway towards the bedroom. So another reminder that we need to be going toward the master bedroom. Place a zombie in hallway 2 with a fire token on him. When he is dealt damage, place the fire token in his room. So remember that charred outline of a body that we found on the operating table? He's not dead. So, we're going to get a zombie, and these things, there's a stack of them randomly. So we don't quite know what his special ability is or what his specific stats are. So, oops. So, damn it. This zombie is not staying in his base very well. Hey, that one sticks better. Okay. So here we have this zombie. And he is on fire, and he is going to be placed right there in hallway 2 with a fire token on him. So that represents the zombie is on fire. Once he takes damage, he's going to deposit that fire token in his room, which will be bad for the investigators. And so now we can see there are 4 turns until the next event happens. So, we will proceed with the next investigator turn now. Alright, it is time for investigator turn number 4. So, we're going to start with Kate and Dexter, because they are the most well-armed investigators, and they're going to be trying to take out this zombie before it causes too much damage. So, who would probably want to go first? I would say probably Kate would want to go first, because she has the shotgun and she can attack the zombie at range. It says her shotgun has a range of 1, which means she can attack the zombie from 1 space away. So, she's going to go 1, 2. Now, she did not enter a room with a zombie because hallway 4 and hallway 2 count as separate rooms. So she's safe from the having to make a horror check. Which is nice, because otherwise she would have had to make a horror check. And then she's going to use her action to attack with the shotgun. Now she doesn't get the +2 to her attack, because he is not in her space, he is 1 space away, but because there is not a door or solid wall between them, she is still able to attack at range 1. So let's see what it says. Alright, ranged weapon. The air around the zombie shimmers. Well, of course it does. He's on fire. Test your lore. Luckily, she has a high lore of 6. So, let's see what she gets. Aha! Pass. You bless your bullets before firing at the zombie's head. Deal weapon damage +1. So, shotgun deals a damage of 4. We're going to do a +1, so that is a 5. And most likely take this guy out. So he's getting damaged for 5 points. Oh! Yeah, no, never mind. Okay. Damage for 5 points. Ooh. Well, as is often true about zombies, he can take a lot of grief before he falls. So he actually can take up to 7 points worth of damage. So he's not quite dead yet. Or not quite dead yet. But this fire token will be placed in his room. And the fire token means, for one thing, it costs, you have to make a horror check, basically, when you try to move into a room that's on fire. Because who would want to do that? And if you end your turn in a room that's on fire, you take some damage. But for now, we're going to search through our fiddly little pile of damage tokens and find one that shows 5 and put it on the zombie like so. Now there's a space on the back of the base for this. I don't like to use that because you have to change out the damage tokens a lot as it takes damage or heals damage. Ooh, I just noticed his spine. That's really cool. Anyway, I just lay them on the base. I use the one on the back for modifying the monster's maximum health, because certain story-specific named monsters have a modifier to their maximum health. So that's what I use that for. So he's got 5, he can take a total of 7. Alright. With Kate's turn out of the way, Dexter is going to go. I think he will try to get into this jammed door in the basement again. So we are splitting up, even though I said that it's probably not a good idea. 1, 2, and he's going to use his action to sprint 3. And then finally we have Monterey Jack. And I think he is going to grab this whiskey that is, lying on the table here, on the desk here, and grab that bottle of whiskey. Because with a name like Jack, you gotta have your whiskey. So he has +1 to his willpower for as long as he has this card.
Got a little liquid courage.
And then he's going to use his movement to go 1, 2, and he's going to enter the freezer in the laboratory. But he can't explore it because he has already used his exploration for the turn. Alright. Now we are going to go back to the keeper step, or the keeper turn, where he will resolve 2 cards back to back because the mansion struck. Okay, so we are now going to have the next keeper turn, where he's going to be doing some extra evil, and unfortunately, the zombie would normally be damaged for 2, which would kill it, for being in a room that's on fire. But that damage occurs at the end of the monster step of the keeper turn. So he's going to move out of that room and into Kate Winthrop's room before the fire can damage him. Bad luck for me. So we're going to start with the threat step, where we will remove this token and draw and resolve 2 cards. The first one is taking its toll. After a while, the blood and bruises all start getting to you. If there are any investigators who have taken 1 or more damage and do not have an injury card. No investigators have taken any damage as of yet. We've been quite lucky. So we will go straight to otherwise. Each investigator draws a face-down mythos card, resolving it at the start of his next turn. Now here's another difference between this and the normal game. In the normal game, the keeper has this deck of mythos cards that he can play during an investigator's turn to basically mess with him. In this variant, you get mythos cards by resolving threat cards such as this one, and they go face down on your character card, like so. And then at the start of that investigator's turn, and no sooner, you can look at the mythos card and must resolve it. Now, mythos cards usually have a requirement of a certain type of room. This one says foyer, hallway, or cave. That requirement is still holds true in this variant. So if, let's say that Monterey Jack had drawn this card. He is not in a foyer, hallway, or cave. The other characters all are. So if he had drawn this at the start of his turn, instead of resolving it, he places it, as though it's an exploration card, into the nearest room that meets that requirement. In this case, it would be the foyer. And it would act as a lock card, which means that as soon as an investigator tries to move into that particular room, or happens to start their turn in that particular room, they have to resolve this card immediately. So that's how mythos cards work in this variant. So that was taking its toll. And we get one more, Curious Attack. The blows were designed not to kill, but merely to flay. If there are any monsters carrying samples, there are not. Otherwise, move a maniac figure in play directly to the space of the investigator closest to an altar, blah, blah, blah. If there are no maniacs in play, spawn a maniac at the altar. So remember when I said that guy was not quite dead, actually? While Dexter has his back turned, this guy slinks away. And he is going to be recovering his strength at the altar in the hidden ceremony room. beyond the basement. You might be wondering, why does Walter Lynch have a hidden ceremony room in his basement? You'll find out. Okay, so that is the threat step. Now we have the monster step, where all monsters move 2 spaces toward the closest investigator and attack. In this case, the zombie moves directly into... what's her name? Kate's. Moves directly into Kate's space, and does not move any further, since he is now in Kate's space, and he will attack. But first she has to make a horror check, which is testing her willpower modified by how scary the monster is, his horror rating, which is a -1. So it's her willpower of 6 minus 1. So that's a 5 or lower that she needs to roll. And she succeeded, so she is not too worried about that zombie, even though he has been burned alive. And she shot him full of lead at point-blank range, and he's still going. No, not too worried. Alright, now he's going to attack her by resolving a combat card. Monster attack. Alright, the shambling creature goes for your throat. Test your dexterity, Kate Winthrop. So, her dexterity... Sorry about the shakiness. I'm trying to hold this so that the figures are still in view. Kate's dexterity is a 5. So, the zombie is lunging for her throat. Oh! She fails. So, the result is its fingers close around your windpipe. Take 2 damage, and you are stunned. So, good thing we just resolved this taking its toll, which would have given an injury card to her if she had taken damage. In this case, she did not get damage until after that card. So she's going to take 2 damage. Get a little 2 damage token here. Her health is now 7 instead of 9, and she is stunned. And stunned is a special status effect. We're just going to put the stun token directly on her to remind ourselves that she's stunned next turn. Stun is a status effect, and just like fire and darkness, I'm always forgetting it, so I'm looking it up right now. A stunned investigator gets -2 to every attribute test, and does not take a second movement step. Stunned monster may not move or attack. Person in darkness gets -2 to attributes during combat, and who wishes and must use a movement and an action to explore. And fire, we already talked about, deals 2 damage at the end of your turn if you are in a room on fire, and you must do a horror check to enter a room on fire. Makes good sense. So, unfortunately, Kate is in a bad situation here for the next turn. And finally, we're going to be putting one more time token on the event deck. Okay, now it's time for investigator turn number 5, I think it is. And Kate is in a really bad situation. She has 2 damage. She would like to cast her Blood Pact spell to heal one of those damage. But if you try to take an action or move anything other than attacking when there is a monster in your space, you have to do an evade test, which basically tests your dexterity, and if you fail, the monster damages you. So it's as though the monster gets a free attack on you. So she really wants to take out that monster before anything else. But she's stunned, so she's going to get -2 to all attribute tests. So let's say she tried to fire that shotgun again. She'd have to test her marksmanship -2, which is only a 3. So I believe she's going to try to use her luck by using one of these skill tokens. And she's going to have to resolve her Mythos card at the start of her turn. But she doesn't necessarily have to go first. We'll see. Maybe Dexter wants to go first. Maybe he wants to go rescue her, actually. Let's see. No, he can't quite make it. He can go 1, 2, and then he would still be on the other side of the door from the zombie. So he couldn't quite make it to her in one turn. So, in any case, we will see what happens.